The particle and the planet are subject to the same laws, and what is learned of one will be known of the other.
You are listening to the Interplanetary Podcast, the exploration of space for the benefit of all humankind. Your hosts in Guildford, Ledra, and Matt.
Oh yeah, baby, James Smithson. James Smithson. Do you know who James Smithson is?
The Smithsonian.
Founder of the Smithsonian Institute, yes.
It's all named after him,
yeah,
the big man.
Which used to be the sort of Museum of America, really. It's like
I visited some of them in Washington when I was there a few years ago.
Oh, really? Yes, well, and of course the Smithsonian Observatory is part of Harvard. But let me tell you an exciting bit of news about James Smithson. I thought, that name rings a bell. He's on my family tree.
No, he isn't.
Yeah, he is. He's the stepson of my first cousin 8 times removed.
Your family tree is so interesting.
Weirdly, he's from the Seymours. He's actually he's related to the Seymours.
That's
so
unbelievable.
He's got something to do with Queen Elizabeth, sort of all that kind of bunch. Yeah.
So lucky. My family tree's so boring compared.
Well, let's not get into it.
So,
but yeah, James
carrying on the
yeah, but James, well, weirdly, James, the reason why he's a stepson is because James Smithson was the illegitimate child of Hugh Percy and some French mistress that he had.
Oh.
So he was actually, even though he's a Brit, he was actually born in Paris, Gay Paris, in the Kingdom of France, as it was back then, in 1765. There you go.
Very interesting.
Now, why are we talking about the Smithsonian?
Because we visited the Science Museum recently for their incredible new immersive experience, the Starstruck immersive experience.
Yeah, it was like the sort of opening night, wasn't it?
Yeah, nothing better than going into a VR experience having just had 2 free glasses of champagne.
I actually don't recommend drinking before VR experiences. It was really not ideal, I don't think, because that is the one thing that hasn't massively improved, has it, with VR, is the being able to be submerged in it for a long time without feeling a little bit queasy.
Mm-hmm. This was the best I've ever experienced.
Yeah, no, it was the best I've experienced. So yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? It's on one of the sort of first floors of the Science Museum. So you go in, and by the way, the Science Museum, they've removed the big space exhibit and it's reopening the space stuff at another part of the building. So if you've been to the Science Museum and you've seen all things like Black Arrow, which we'll mention in the interview, it's all moved. So it's time for a revisit to the Science Museum if you've been there. So yeah, it's worth going.
It's via the Technicians Gallery on level 1.
That the Smithsonian Starstruck is, yes. Yeah. So yeah, we sort of waited for our, because I think you can only go in sort of groups of 6 or something like that. They have to sort of time you in because it's an enormous room that when you look at it just looks like an empty room with some funny shapes on the floor. Mm-hmm. Then you put your VR headset and then you can walk around the universe.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And because it's by the Smithsonian, and I think this is the good thing about it, because it's by the Smithsonian, it's very accurate. So all the information that you're being told isn't nonsense, loads of rubbish. It's all very, very interesting. And you could walk up to things like the James Webb Telescope or the Hubble Telescope or all these various different other, the Chandra X-ray Observatory.
Well, you're climbing aboard the different telescopes and going to the places where they
can see.
They've been, going to the different satellites. So listen to the sun's vibrations, behold solar flares.
And stood on the edge of a black hole.
Yeah, that was terrifying because you can walk up to the edge and look over the edge and feel like you're just looking into the abyss. You do
feel like it. Now, my favourite bit, however, was walking and there was a kind of orange grid by the side of me and I thought, I wonder what that is. And I put my hand out to touch the orange grid and it was indeed the wall of the room.
Well, and you can see your hand and you can see everybody else.
Yeah, you can see all your friends. So if you go in with your friends, all your friends have got like a little name tag over the top. And then everyone else that you went in who wasn't your friend, you can still see them so that you don't bump into them and, you know.
It was the perfect length as well. I think any longer it would have been too long. and any shorter, you'd have felt like you weren't getting your money's worth.
Yeah, but so it was really good. So yeah, we recommend it.
I do highly recommend it. Yeah,
Yes,
just don't have a couple of Prosecco's beforehand. Save have post VR cocktails.
I enjoyed it so much. I am going to take Jamie. So
amazing. Jamie will love it.
Yeah, so I'm going to take Jamie again. So yeah, if you happen to find yourself in London at the Science Museum, go see it.
Tell you what was quite funny was I had an issue with my VR headset. You did, yours was perfect, but mine kind of kept it was on the 38-degree heat day.
Oh yeah, it was one of the hottest days of the year, wasn't it?
Yeah, and what was really funny was because I had to quickly go back and just get mine fixed. You said that you saw me walking off into space,
into lava. No, we were on a sort of lava world. And you'd wandered off into all the lava. I was thinking, how come I can't walk into the lava? And yeah, you were miles into like embedded in the mountainside at one point.
No,
oh my God, she's dead. Like that. Yeah, it was quite funny. But yeah, it was very enjoyable. It was a very
incredible, yeah.
So
there was an astronaut there.
There was a UK astronaut. And talking of UK astronauts, I do actually have an interview. I interviewed John McFall, so that's going to come out soon. Absolutely awesome person. I absolutely loved the interview. He was talking to me from the European Astronaut Centre in Cologne. And yeah, it's a really amazing story, unbelievable guy, a bit of a local hero as well. He's actually
he sounds really inspirational.
He's from around this neck of the woods, the Surrey neck of the woods. So that was really interesting. Maybe I should organise an interview with the astronaut that was there, who was
Megan Christian.
Yes, so Megan Christian is a reserve astronaut, I believe, and I mean she was pretty badass as well.
Total badass.
Like really, like one of those people that can communicate exceptionally well. She's got something to do with graphene or something like that. She's like, so she's a mega chemist, but she's also done the Antarctic thing.
When she was talking about how even on a moonless night, the stars, when she was looking down at the floor, the stars had created a shadow.
Yeah,
her shadow was there. From the starlight. That is amazing.
Yeah, there was like two sentences next to each other where it's like, yeah, you don't get any, there's literally no daytime for 4 months. And then, and yes, it's so dark that the Milky Way casts a shadow. It's like, what? Yeah, that was pretty incredible. So yes, definitely go check out the Smithsonian.
Yeah. And we got a goodie bag.
My gosh, we've got a goodie bag.
You get a little goodie bag. I've got it in front of us now because we haven't actually tried any of it. But you get this little Smithsonian Starstruck immersive experience.
Maybe it was just us. Maybe only we got the goodie bag.
Oh, I've got a feeling that they must be giving these out to
You
kids.
think?
Don't you think?
No, I think this was a special thing for just us.
I bet you can buy them in the gift shop.
Yeah.
But you
definitely buy.
You only get a few little things. You get a little postcard, but you get these two space food. But you were saying it's not real space.
Yes, the freeze-dried ice cream never did go into space because, as the experts said, you don't want kind of boring food in space. You don't want to you want to actually feel like you're having a good time because there's not much else going on.
But the freeze-dried mini marshmallows. Should we try one?
Are you going to have one?
Yeah,
oh my
let's
God,
do
it's open. It's open. Yeah, I don't know when else we're going to eat it otherwise. Oh no!
Problem monkeying it. Come on, enjoy the ASMR of this.
Oh no, it has opened. There we go.
Hey.
Oh, these just look like marshmallows.
They are marshmallows. That's exactly what they are. Oh no, they are. They're very hard.
Oh, they're freeze dried.
Yeah, there you go.
I've had all the moisture removed.
Oh, lovely. Oh my God. Oh no. That's squeaky. That's like.
Oh yeah, it's got that squeaky thing.
Mm-hmm. No.
Not sure I'm a fan of freeze-dried marshmallows.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can skip the goodie bag.
Anyway, so
but definitely go to check out the immersive experience.
Yeah, it was real fun. That was definitely really fun. So this interview I've got is with a guy called Rob Coppinger, who I believe is a member of the British Interplanetary Society.
Sorry, I'm still trying to finish this marshmallow.
Yeah, I've got it stuck in my teeth. The Hotel and Skylon, the story of Britain's space planes.
Oh, amazing.
Now, the reason why I knew about this book was because it actually mentions the Interplanetary podcast quite a few times, I think.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I do think the Interplanetary podcast had the definitive Alan Bond interviews. So there's a lot of like info in those Alan Bond interviews, parts 1, 2, 3 and 4. Quite long, went round his house and talked to him.
That's very cool.
So it's cool. So who am I to complain that someone's been citing my work?
Incredible.
Absolutely excellent.
Yeah, you should be proud.
So this is an interview with Rob Coppinger about Hotel and Skylon. Écoutez.
The Interplanetary Podcast, putting the ace back into space.
I am joined on the podcast by Rob Coppinger, who's got a new book out, Hotel and Skylon. Talk about right up the Strasser of the more Brit listeners of the Interplanetary podcast. Of course, it's kind of where the whole thing started. So welcome to the podcast, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
It's your new book, Hotel and Skylon. What convinced you that they needed a full-length book dedicated to
Well, I remembered a hotel from my childhood, and then in the years after that, I heard about Skylon, and then when I became a journalist on my first job, I worked on a magazine called The Engineer, and had the opportunity and excuse to go along to reaction engines and visit them and talk to them. And I studied engineering at university and had a lifelong interest in all things aerospace. And I came away thinking these guys are they know what they're doing. This is not just it's not pie in the sky. These guys really know what they're doing. And then a few years later, I became technical reporter on what was then a weekly magazine called Flight International. And at the time, I thought, well, now I'm working for a magazine like Flight International. I wonder if I could. And that's actually back when it occurred to me that I could write a book about Hotel and Skylon. But it just took me a long time to get around to doing it. And when I checked, there were no books on Hotel and Skylon.
Certainly not on Skylon. It was very hard to find any information on it at all whenever I talked about it. Hotel, like you, I remember as a kid seeing on Tomorrow's World, I think.
Yeah, I have fleeting memories of it as a child. I don't really recall. I remember maybe a TV news report. I don't remember much more. Maybe an advert in a magazine, maybe a British Aerospace advert. Maybe it was used for that. I can't remember. But it was a funny story because so I decided to write the book, and when you search the internet and searched all the various book reseller websites, there was no book on Hotel and Skylon. And I thought, well, I better contact the British Aerospace Heritage Department because they're going to be quite important for all sorts of documentation about Hotel. And I rang them, I got through to them and spoke to this gentleman. And he said, oh, I must tell you, someone is already writing a book about Hotel. I thought, well, okay, well, good for him. And anyway, this gentleman's event later on sent me an email about listing all the material they had at Wharton, at the Heritage Department, the British BAE Systems has. In the end, actually, I didn't need it, but I didn't need to visit them. But what was very strange was a few days later, I received an email from Dan Sharp. I think he works at Morton Books, and he writes all sorts of books about all sorts of rocketry and aviation topics. And he told me he was writing a book about Hotel. And he actually asked me if I wanted to help him write it. And I actually declined because I knew from looking at Morton Books, I could see what sort of book they would do. And I didn't want to do that sort of book. And then the next step of my process was to start contacting all the people that I'd learned over the years had been involved in Hotel and then Skylon.
Did you have a kind of view of what the story was before you started, and did that view change by the time you'd finished? Was there something surprising about the story.
I think as a journalist, you're always asking yourself, okay, how do I make this appealing to the reader? And I think, and also you're also got your artistic hat on and your commercial hat on. So I'm thinking I also want this to appeal to a wide range of readers. The sort of reader that I had in mind was someone who had an interest in space, didn't actually know much. They might watch the odd space shuttle documentary on TV. They might be old enough to remember HOTOL from the 80s. They might be young enough to think, Britain has space planes. What the hell is that? So this sort of general interest. So that was my approach really, was to write a book that would be accessible to anybody, irrespective of educational background, who had an interest in space and would be interested to learn about the fact the UK did have and may have again, or certainly has had, 2 spaceplane projects, which did some quite serious work.
There are some space planes, aren't there, still out there? And weirdly, I saw a picture of Dream Chaser the other day in front of a bunch of speakers that have been built just round the corner from me, because I was visiting a PA company that we use, and they build these massive PA speakers to test various things, and one of them was Dream Chaser was up there with these massive stack of speakers. So. And of course, yeah, the European Space Agency still have a space plane that they're working on, et cetera, but not quite on the same scale as HOTOL and Skylon. These were like serious launch vehicles rather than like return vehicle, like upper stages, I suppose.
Yeah, essentially, you're referring to the European Space Agency, Space Rider. It's a small space plane. It's really a lifting body design. It doesn't have a wing as such. It has a small payload capacity. It would stay in orbit for a couple of months. It's essentially a sort of flying laboratory. You send it up, experiments are on board, that you can expose materials to space. It's sort of a smaller, less capable version of the United States Space Force's X-37B, and it would come back and land at a runway. It helps to advance some of the reusability technologies. But you're absolutely right. Also with Dream Chaser, obviously a very substantial space plane, much larger than the X-37B, could deliver several tons of cargo to the International Space Station if it ever does that. But again, it's launched. It really comes back to almost the beginning of the book, because they're all linked to HOTOL in one particular way. And the fact that the story of HOTOL began with Alan Bond, who, for those of your audience who don't know who Alan Bond is a very capable British engineer who has specialised in all sorts of fields and came up with the engine technology that could make a runway-to-runway space plane rather than a launch pad-to-runway space plane. And Alan Bond was at a meeting, a British Interplanetary Society meeting, with a friend of his, Bob Parkinson, who they would work together on HOTOL. And at the time, Bob wasn't at British Aerospace, but he would join them, and he would be part of the sort of gang that got the whole project going and got the British government to put money into it. And they were at a meeting where it was talking about the French space plane Hermes. And Bob and Alan were absolutely right in saying that Hermes was just replicating the US Air Force's 1960s dinosaur project, which is exactly what Dream Chaser, Space Rider, and the X-37B, they're all essentially versions of that dinosaur project, which was a space plane that is launched like the upper stage of a rocket, as you say. It's an upper stage of a 2-stage launch vehicle. And there's limitations to that. There's when you go back to the origins of the space age, space planes were always envisaged to be a part of it. And originally with some ideas coming out of Germany. And you would have a situation where a plane would take off from a runway from an airport and would fly up to space, go into orbit and fly back. And that's still a dream. But I think what I can show in the book is that technologies that can make this happen have been the brainchild of a very important part of that is Alan Bond is the inventor of one very key technology for this. And the technologies for this sort of, as they call it, aircraft-like operations, the technologies have been worked on here in the UK, and I'm not in the UK at the moment, so I shouldn't say that,
Yeah.
but been worked on in the UK, and really, we're at a time now where reusability is ever more feasible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess in a small way, even Starship has a kind of feels like it has a bit of a heritage of one of these like space planes. Like it's a vehicle that can return. It's just it doesn't land on a runway with wings, does it? It's just, but it feels like it's got a bit of that heritage stuck in it. I mean, Alan Bond is a pretty inspirational figure in some ways, isn't he? Because it's like I sometimes wonder what he's going to end up being remembered for, because he seems to have invented quite a few sort of key technologies, but none of them have kind of made their way to like fruition yet. So I wonder, what's your thoughts on kind of how Alan Bond's going to get remembered?
I think in the UK space industry, he'll be remembered for his work on HOTOL and Skylon and the Sabre propulsion engine. Sabre stands for Synergetic Air Breathing Rocket Engine, and it's quite a unique design, which at one point the UK government classified as top secret, which is quite funny, and is one of the many twists and turns in the story and in my book. And how Alan had to solve that problem in order when he had a sort of, his engine had been classified top secret by the British government, but then he wanted to continue with Skylon. So how do you solve the problem that your rocket engine is now top secret? But he found, although they did declassify the engine later, at one point he still had to get around a whole series of patent issues, and he had quite a clever solution for that. So I think Alan will be remembered as someone who really spearheaded technologies that are going to be critical for a future phase of spaceflight. In many ways, you could say he and his colleagues were ahead of their time. And I think one of the themes of the book is that if people had less conventional thinking and had been a bit more ambitious, in a way that Elon Musk is, then we probably could have reusable space planes by now. There's one very prophetic part in the book where, and this is from many years ago. I wrote about Skylon when I was at Flight International. HOTOL when I was at Flight International. Yeah, I went to the National Archives, and there was actually a secret classified assessment of the HOTOL technologies. And the assessment was that it could work, but it wouldn't work until the 2020s. Oh. And you sort of think, well, look at SpaceX now, and you think, well, there you go. They were absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, so do you genuinely think, like, if HOTOL, for example, say if Elon Musk had, instead of being obsessed with the type of spacecraft he had been obsessed with, and he'd gone down the spaceplane route, and of course it's the American system in some ways. He's able to get the NASA funding, and there seems to be a lot more scope in, particularly the Americans seem to be are much better at doing this stuff, especially than the Brits. And yeah. I wonder, do you think, like, if it had been an Elon Musk project, do you think in actual fact we would have had some form of space plane? Or is it? Did you find that maybe that the economies of it don't actually stack up compared to something like Starship with Super Heavy? Or is there still a place for it? I know there's a big question in there. It's probably needs a lot of unpacking, but
yeah. Well, yeah, you touched on a number of different things. I think in terms of one of the comments made in the book by one of the people who worked on the HOTOL project was that Elon Musk found a way to achieve the sort of reusability, or looks like he's found a way to achieve the sort of reusability people foresaw with the HOTOL and Skylon, but with a rocket, with a vertical launch, vertical landing rocket. I think there's going to be limitations on that. And Richard Varvel, who's one of the co-founders of Reaction Engines that works on Skylon, he pointed out that ultimately you're going to have, that's probably going to be limited. And we maybe want to come on to that later on. But whereas with and this is why aircraft-like operations are so attractive because you just need a runway. It just takes off and lands. One of the issues you've got with a rocket coming back to land is your failure mode. One of your failure modes is loss of propulsion, and therefore then you have a big plummeting bomb heading towards. And if it's heading towards Kennedy Space Center, you've got quite a densely populated area not too far away. So what you find is that when you talk to people about where you'd want to place a system like Starship, as it currently is, and you want as many launches as Musk wants, you need to put it in the middle of nowhere to make sure that anything that comes back and loses control of its flights, you're not going to have a big crater. You don't have a big crater in a nearby town. So then, and of course, as soon as you have to move the launch site to somewhere that's in the middle of nowhere, then you automatically create all sorts of other logistical fun and games. Whereas if you have an airport, essentially, a spaceport with a runway, essentially an airport, the aircraft is gliding back. The shuttle is gliding back, as the space shuttle did, and when it takes off, it will take off, and but essentially you can go to a safer area before you make the dramatic ascent to space. So you avoid the issues of, say, like New Glenn recently did, where you may explode on the launch pad or just after or as you're ascending, with all the potential debris problems for the population below.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the New Glenn has been catastrophic disaster, hasn't it? Because you've wiped out all the infrastructure more than just the rocket itself, and I guess that's the same with Starship coming down with the catching mechanism. It only takes one of them to cock up, and you've destroyed a huge, expensive facility as well. And I get that kind of, because it was definitely something when I was speaking to Alan Bond, he was very dubious about that. Like you said, the failure mode of these rockets coming down, and ultimately you've got a rocket engine that you're relying on them, and they may not be the most reliable things in the world all the time.
Yeah, nature has a very good solution. It's called a wing, and birds have been using it for millennia, and even the dinosaurs had it, and so a space shuttle. Once you get through the heating of re-entry, obviously a very sad case of Columbia, but as long as you can get through the higher temperatures of re-entry, you've got a nice, comfortable glide all the way home. So that's the advantage there. Touching on, if Elon Musk went down this path, I think what maybe I like to think I showed in the book is that if the government had just continued to put money in, because this all hypersonic technologies also. We hear a lot about hypersonic missiles these days. And the UK government, again, could have, and obviously defence spending is quite a big issue in the UK at the moment. And if the UK government had simply taken a sort of a longer term, or just put some money into this, there could be commercial spin-offs, maybe later down the line, they could have brought in public-private partnership sort of model, and slowly you would have developed all the key technologies, and then you bring them together around about now, and hey presto, you've got a space plane. I think if you wanted to play counterfactual history, I think that's one way you could imagine it could have actually happened. But instead, and this is an issue I addressed in the book, is a big problem that reusability used to have, is that people said, well, reusability is going to cost a huge amount of money to develop, and why spend that money when we can just buy cheap expendable rockets or cheaper expendable rockets in the first place? People couldn't look past that initial high expenditure you needed to achieve the reusability that would give you a lot of profitable gains in later down the line. And I think what SpaceX has shown is that Falcon 9 isn't even fully reusable. It's only partially reusable. Every upper stage goes straight into the bottom of the ocean somewhere. But Falcon 9 and SpaceX's ability for rapid turnaround and multiple flights for the first stage booster have really dramatically changed the options for a space economy. And you've now got companies a British one called Space Forge, an American one called Vida Industries, and they're now offering space manufacturing.
That whole bringing the cost of launching a kilogram into space and the SpaceX element of it, I always think that there's a you're talking about the UK not with the long-term vision and saying, well, it's going to be cheaper just to do it like this. I mean, even worse is that the UK kind of basically said, well, there's no point even developing a launch vehicle because we can just get cheap rides on American rockets, right? So it's like we're even not even in the layer of let's have our own launch vehicle. We're in the layer of what's the point because someone else can do it for us. And luckily, I guess there were some European nations that went, oh, we should probably build a launch vehicle so that we can do our own sort of national projects that may kind of be in competition with American projects, right?
Yeah, well, I think certain countries, like obviously France, and where I live, is obviously a nation that's had a long-standing, a strong sense of independence. I think obviously there are different historical reasons why the British and the Americans are closer, and there's a very much different relationship and a readiness by the British to accept American leadership, to put it in a polite way. And I think, obviously the UK developed its own. The only nation in the world to develop a satellite launch capability and then dump it, and then obviously the British rocket technology was going to be part of a European effort, a broader European effort. You had the European Launch and Development Organisation, and then obviously eventually that was merged in with another organisation to create the European Space Agency. But then the UK eventually just basically dropped out of launch vehicles. And I think what probably SpaceX is showing is if you can, well, he's going to corner the market in launch because no one will be able to compete with SpaceX on cost per kilogram to space, and also the cadence, the frequency of flight is so amazing that you can. I remember many times in the past, one of the big issues with the economics of satellite launch was that you could build a satellite, but you try getting it into space, you had to wait so long for a rocket. And there was this sort of big queue, and so you could have a business model for a low Earth orbit satellite-based service of some description, telecommunications or some other service. But the trouble is you go bankrupt before your satellite went into orbit because you'd have to wait for a rocket. Well, now that uncertainty about being able to deploy your asset in space, it's going to produce a revenue stream, that certainly just faded away. And I think what the key difference here is that, and Elon Musk is referenced in the book, what I found very amazing was that at various points in time, there were sort of synchronicities between the timing of announcements by Alan Bond and his team and the SpaceX people, and I describe it as an undeclared race. And so when the book gets past Hotel and gets onto Skylon, and when things really hotted up at the beginning of this century, I always try to remind myself I now live in the 21st century, which seems always science fiction to me as a child.
Yeah.
And there was a point where Elon Musk, had only just launched Scott's Falcon 1 going, and he made a speech about where he wanted to take his rockets, I think in 2009 or 2010. And it was just a few weeks before or after Reaction Engines received their first really big contract from the European Space Agency. Something like €1 million or £1 million. And I sort of describe it in the book as sort of a starting point for a sort of undeclared race, who would get there. Because that was it. There was a UK, or it was back then, it was the British National Space Centre still, and they put out announcements saying, by 2020 or 2015, there could be a British space plane flying, following this award to Reaction Engines. And of course, then on the other side of the Atlantic, you've got SpaceX saying we're going to have reusable rockets by so-and-so date. So there did seem to be potentially this alternative parallel universe where these sort of two technologies would go head to head. But of course, unfortunately, space Reaction Engines being in the UK was never able to garner the financial resources to realise its dreams. Whereas, Elon Musk had the advantage of having a NASA that was trying to find a replacement for the space shuttle.
Yeah, and luckily they did sort of bank on SpaceX because, of course, Boeing and etc. weren't able to deliver where they were supposed to. But I mean, in terms of the UK, I mean, like the financial numbers are obviously very, very different. And obviously on the early podcast, I was championing Skylon, thinking, believing some of the timelines, I suppose, in the fact that it might be a viable thing that we might see even flying in the late 2020s, maybe. But having done the research and looked back at the whole thing in retrospect, was Skylon ever close to becoming a reality? Could it, in your view, do you think it could have actually have carried on that sort of HOTOL legacy and actually become something, or was it really doomed from inception?
There was one turning point where I think if some of the views across the European continent had been a little bit different, we could be talking about Skylon. It might be called something else. We could be talking about Skylon being a real thing. And what that was that when they decided they had to replace Ariane 5, the European Space Agency examined all its options, and as my book describes, and as Dr. David Parker, who was senior figure in the UK Space Agency and British National Space Centre and European Space Agency, as he describes, it was part of the debate. And the French Space Agency has a sort of roadmap for the Ariane rockets, and it has a version of Ariane called Ariane Ultimate, and it looks just like Skylon. And Richard Varvel, who co-founded Reaction Engines along with Alan Bond, he's seen it. They did Reaction Engines, worked with the French Space Agency on these sort of space plane options. So it was examined. It was examined in the 20-teens, and but the one thing you're always up against is the industrial base and the politics linked to it. That industrial base represents jobs. You can sort of see it recently with the failure of the Franco-German Future Combat Air System project, which has failed because they just couldn't come to an agreement. Because at the end of the day, who makes what where relates to jobs, and jobs relate to votes. So, and I think really, the Ariane rocket, there's a whole industrial base across Europe to support the Ariane, from Ariane 4 to Ariane 5, now Ariane 6. And being able to sort of change that is extremely difficult. And when Elon Musk began, he was openly ridiculed by Europeans. There's videos you can find on social media of leading figures at Arianespace and elsewhere who just said SpaceX's claims were a fantasy. And now we can see they weren't a fantasy, that the Americans had the resources and SpaceX had the engineers. I met Gwyn Shotwell in 2004, and I've been to Hawthorne, been to their factory in California, and they had the people and the United States scientific and engineering know-how is there to make it a reality, to make reusable rockets a reality. So I think there was a fleeting window, and I think if SpaceX, if it was happening now, I think if Europe were considering what to do next for Ariane 5 now, then Ariane Ultimate / Skylon would probably have a much better chance of being chosen.
My thinking was that the sort of dream of the space plane was dead because of how much, I guess, Elon Musk has demonstrated the technology as working. But then saying that, having read his SpaceX IPO, it's like the SpaceX itself, of course, still loses loads and loads of money, regardless of how reusable its rockets are and how much it's dominant in the market. And they make their money from make their money from, of course, Starlink more than, and they found a way of launching Starlink, I guess, reasonably cheaply, even though they're losing money on that launch. Yeah, that's a really interesting response to it. And is that because really Ariane, obviously they used to have absolutely dominance in the commercial market, and then SpaceX came along and they've really lost that dominance altogether, haven't they? That it's SpaceX, that's it. It's like Ariane 6 can't really compete except with performing launches of national importance and things like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, because of Ariane 6 had some problems, it was delayed, and a major European program like Galileo, which the French and other nationalities would much prefer, launched on European rockets, had to be launched on American rockets. And coming back to the industrial base, there's a real problem where the European system is simply not set up for the rate of production that the Americans can achieve, that SpaceX has invested in and has achieved. And it would require, a substantial investment in facilities and infrastructure and logistics, especially when your launch site is halfway across the world. Obviously, the rockets are built in Europe and then they're shipped to French Guiana for the launch. And so there's all sorts of those challenges there. The Europeans, I think the Chinese are now trying to move towards what the Russians, the Chinese are trying to move towards what the Americans are doing, and there's various companies trying to recreate Falcon 9 and Starship in China. And I'm sure the Chinese will get there eventually. But the reality is that, and this comes back to where I think will be Starships, where it will become a money spinner. And actually, we have an article about the IPO in the next edition of Spaceflight. Just to mention, I'm the editor of the British Interplanetary Society's members magazine Spaceflight. In our next edition that comes out in a few weeks' time, we have an article looking at the SpaceX public share offering. But I think that where Starship will really make a big difference is, first of all, they'll be able to place in orbit much more quickly, and the Starlink constellation. The SpaceX is also delivering a military version called Starshield. That's another revenue generator for the company. And that's another mega constellation it's got to put up there. And also these data centers and space-based solar power. I think people perhaps haven't caught on quite yet to how significant a market. And I think the whole reason why SpaceX has had the evaluation that it's had is not really the rockets, not really Starship. It's the revenue that will come when most of the world's data centers are in space, and they are SpaceX data centers, and they are launched by SpaceX rockets. As you may know, SpaceX not so long ago filed for a 1 million constellation data center constellation.
I mean, yeah, I remain pretty. I have to say, I'm always pretty unconvinced by those types of technologies in terms of how far away they are. I just think about how hard space is and how hard a data center is to build, and then building a data center in space seems to me like, wow, that's ambitious. I mean, I totally get it. If you can crack it, then you're the god of the world, right?
I think what we're seeing, there's a much broader picture here, which is slightly beyond the remit of the book, but certainly in my job, I see quite a lot of. And that is what we're really seeing now. So we're seeing a lot of investment in the space-related technologies, companies like Vada Industries and Spaceforge getting investors, and other companies that are working on in-space manufacturing and in-orbit servicing and assembly and these sort of technologies and services. Because humanity has got to a point where, first of all, we had seaports and ships, and then when we got the horseless carriage, we started developing roads, and you had petrol stations and all that sort of infrastructure. And then we had airports, and all that infrastructure to go with it. And then, the telephone system obviously has now become another major infrastructure of humanity's economic activity. And the next stage, and the reason why space is now attracting so much investment, and SpaceX has no problems getting the multi-trillion dollar evaluation that it did, is because space is the new infrastructure. It's the new airports, the seaports, and roads combined. And as we all know, the space helps us with weather forecasting, agriculture, defense, security, telecommunications, TV, and all these things that are very fundamental to our modern way of life are enabled by space.
Yeah, I mean, with that, and thinking about, say, where Britain and Europe are in terms of computing power, there's some frightening statistic that America has 74% of computing power and Europe has 6% of the world's computing power. Are we even further behind then with essentially this kind of space? If we were talking about the world's compute, the world's kind of space related infrastructure. Are we even further behind there? And therefore, the stories like the Hotel and Skylon thing, the fact that we didn't invest enough in it and we didn't kind of push those concepts further, have pushed us, basically put us in a fairly perilous position where we've fallen behind, hugely in space, in computer technology, in data centers, in AI, etc., where it's part of a bigger problem, isn't it?
I think the big advantage the United States of America has is a large domestic population. And I know obviously it's a bit of a controversial topic in the UK, but the European single market is the European equivalent of the American domestic market. It's a European single market, which isn't a single market in all industries. There's no, in the service industries, I know the single market is completed, but in many areas, the European Union single market, it does function essentially as a domestic market. And obviously you get all sorts of advantages in terms of scales of economy and the justification for investment. And I think that ultimately the United States has a vast economy because it has a vast population, it has all the advantages of having a one currency and this single market. Although there are differences in regulations between some states within the 50 states, broadly speaking, it is a true single market. And I think that's the lesson for the world. And I think you look at China and see how that's developing rapidly, and China has its own space station, which it will expand. It's not going to stay as it is. They're going to add more modules. And India has its own plans for an Indian space station. So the only way human beings can afford these sort of projects and afford to put the investment through taxes and through private financing, the only way you can do that is by having a single market. And here in France, the politicians talk about merging the European capital markets, because that's the only way you can then deliver the levels of financing to European industry that American industry already has. American industry can invest, SpaceX can get huge amounts of private financing, as we've seen, because America has what's called deep capital markets. And when you've got a continent of 27 independent sovereign states, there are more states than that in Europe, but just to focus on the European Union, the 27 states in the European Union, if they were all just completely separate, independent sovereign states, that's 27 capital markets. Well, they're not going to be very deep, not compared to America. So and obviously the expense of launch vehicles always did lead itself to the European countries saying, okay, we've got to collaborate on this. It's just very sad that the British decided to walk away from that. And I think a big question the United Kingdom has got to ask itself is, do we want to continue as we are, or do we want to seek the advantages of being part of an enormous 400 million person single market on our doorstep, even if some people don't like the fact that you have to share sovereignty with the French?
God
But
forbid.
it's not a bad thing. Living here, I'd say it's not a bad thing.
No, well, it's certainly, we could learn a thing or two about certain foods and things. It's like, you don't.
Actually, I can't. You can never find. Very rarely do you find a bad restaurant in France. I think coming back to could Britain do it alone? I mean, when you look at the amount of money being spent on HS2, and again, coming back to that rather controversial topic of Brexit, I remember seeing a news report about the government a number of years ago, because of the border checks that were going to have to be brought in because the UK is no longer part of the single market. It was going to cost £5 billion to install all the necessary border infrastructure, because the UK is no longer in the customs union or in the European single market. Well, the conservative estimates for developing Skylon are 10 billion. So
that's a bit annoying.
So if you can find 5 billion down the back of the couch because you need some extra desks at Dover, one has to ask, well, if you really, when you consider the potential economic advantages and the enormous significance of space infrastructures to the world economy, well, is there an argument in Britain saying, well, just stuff it, we can do it, we don't have to wait for Ariane Ultimate, let's just do it, let's rejuvenate. Andy Burnham should say we're going to rejuvenate the north of England by having the world's first proper space plane.
I mean, those figures, 5 billion, 10 billion, they seem a lot, I guess. But when you look at the SpaceX IPO and then try and conceive of the figures in there, that SpaceX are losing that amount every year as a individual company loss rather than a country's loss. You know what I mean? It's so SpaceX themselves appear to have more money than the entire British nation, or maybe even the whole of Europe. That's what's so crazy. More ambition than Europe as a whole. Yeah, it gets complicated, doesn't it? Because Britain steps away from the launch side of things while still being in Europe, and we're still part of the European Space Agency despite Brexit and things like that. So I guess for a lot of listeners, it gets complicated like that because there are things that we are part of. We're embedded in Europe, the European Space Agency, and we're putting in our penny's worth, except in the launch element of it. And of course, we're out of the European Union, but still in various different bits of it. It gets really complicated, but totally I get the ultimately we're not the United States or Russia or China or India with these, like you said, huge domestic populations. Yeah.
North Korea has got nuclear weapons and is investing in nuclear submarines. So maybe it's not the best example, but if a country wants to do it, if a country wants to sacrifice everything to do something, it can be done. It only requires the political will.
Well, yeah, we've done it, haven't we? The UK have done the nuclear weapons elements of it, and although
and we had Black Arrow.
Yeah,
we developed our own. As I said earlier on, we developed the only nation in the world to develop a satellite launch capability and then to dump it.
Yeah. I mean, would it take a British visionary, or is it really, even if you have a visionary like the Alan Bonds and your Bob Parkinsons, even though they are visionaries and in some ways they should be, we should have them in the same stature of your Elon Musks. They're just not in the right continent to deliver.
Yeah, because SpaceX ultimately was benefited from two things. One was the United States military were fed up with having expensive, expendable rockets from the likes of Boeing and others, and Lockheed Martin, and NASA needed a replacement for the space shuttle. So the money taps were turned on, and there were other rocket companies. There was one outfit called Kistler Aerospace, which didn't last for long. That was another one of these sort of new startups that was going to sort of transform the launch market, but they folded. They had as Elon Musk would say, they didn't have a strategy for success. So,
Well, Elon Musk
and
is lucky, isn't he? Like, if you read Eric Berger's book about like the rise of SpaceX, they're only one launch away from no one ever knowing the name Elon Musk. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. Well, Elon Musk famously said, if we fail 3 times, I'll give up. But he didn't. He went for a fourth go, and I think he probably went for a fourth go because the US military were probably saying to him, you should try again. Don't give up. When I went to when I visited SpaceX, at the time they were developing Falcon 9, and they were very kind and generous, and I was given the tour by the head of the Falcon 9 program, and he was ex-US Air Force. He'd worked on the rocket programs of the 1990s. So, and when I met Gwynne Shotwell in 2004, I said to her, "Are you ex-Department of Defense?" And she said yes. Now, it's interesting that I don't see that anywhere in a sort of biographies at the moment, but there's a lot of Department of Defense who were behind Elon Musk. I think they saw Elon Musk was someone who was prepared to spend his own money to develop a launch system that could deliver to the US military what they wanted: rapid launch at a much lower cost. And he's really delivered it with the Falcon 9.
Yeah, I mean, if we're really honest, that Ariane itself only, the sort of launch vehicle, even if you look at the heritage of Ariane 5, Ariane 6, really, it's down to the fact that the French need that as a military component of their own nuclear defense. It's so like a lot of the time, the money often comes from military spending, doesn't it? And I guess if space, if Hotel and presumably they were getting money because the military would have been saying, actually, yeah, Hotel and Skylon, of course, have military application.
Yeah. On the French nuclear deterrent, it uses a missile called the M51, which is a solid rocket. So, and the Americans as well, their nuclear missiles use solid rockets. You do that because the solid propellant just sits inside the rocket, inside the launch chamber, or wherever it is, and you're not having to wait. You don't have to store cryogenic propellant and then pump it into the rocket before you launch it. That's why they always use solid rockets. So the Italians also have the Italians don't have a nuclear deterrent, but they, as far as we know, but they have very good solid rockets. And obviously you have the Avio Vega rocket, which is partially a solid rocket fuel system. And the Ariane rockets do have a solid rocket component. But I think really when it comes down to Europe's policy towards rockets, from covering this for many years, the European governments know what they want from space. They know the military telecommunications they want. They understand the weather forecasting and other aspects of services from space that help the economy. And I think that they decided they're prepared to pay for a rocket that can launch can launch the number of satellites they need. So along with some space science. And that's essentially why you have an industrial base for Ariane that is really only, compared to SpaceX, a handful of rockets. Whereas SpaceX, looking at it from a market point of view, obviously the Americans have deep pockets and they can prepare to spend the billions because if you look at Dragon, when it flies on Falcon 9, there's only a couple of Dragon flights a year. They go up there, they take 4 astronauts, and the Dragon stays docked to the International Space Station for 6 months or 3 months, and then brings the crews back. So in terms of the amount of billions that NASA has spent on helping SpaceX develop the Dragon crew spacecraft and the Falcon 9, I think a lot of our European governments will say, well, that's just not worth the money. That's just very profligate, and we can't justify that amount of expenditure. Whereas in Europe, they're looking at every penny, because again, you still have a Europe of 27 states, and so they look at it individually as individual governments, and so those sort of numbers get very scary.
Yeah, I mean, I seem to remember that quite a lot of the Europeans were bemoaning the fact that SpaceX was operating on an unfair playing field commercially because it was receiving so much, money from a national from their national space agency, from NASA. And so, it became incredibly hard to compete with something that was essentially being, which I kind of get it does feel slightly like the market's rigged against them.
Well, I mean, the Europeans are going to face the same problem from China, because although China talks about commercial rocket companies, if you look closely, they're all linked.
Well, yeah,
they're all linked in some way to the Chinese government or arms, science research agencies of the Chinese government. So the Europeans are going to get squeezed from both sides. You're going to have once the Chinese start being able to have the sort of cadence that SpaceX does, then you've got to question, really the economics for European launch just fall apart. And again, this is another. I think if the Europeans, I haven't written about this in the book, but I have posed these sort of questions in my own journalistic writing, and that is Ariane 6 came in delayed, late. It's been more expensive. It's supposed to fly a dozen times a year at least. It hasn't come anywhere near that so far. And the economics of it and the industrial base is just don't really support the sort of cadence that SpaceX has achieved and the Chinese will achieve. So I think we're coming to a point now in the next few years where the Europeans are going to have to look at replacing Ariane 6. And Ariane 6 is not going to be operating for 20 years like Ariane 5 was. And Ariane 6 will have to be replaced fairly soon. And the Europeans are going to have to ask themselves, what are we going to do? Because the same old, slightly better rocket, slightly more reliability just isn't going to cut it anymore. And I think this could be an opportunity for the son of Skylon, because there is a project that's actually finishing in August. It's the first stage of what could become a longer-term spaceplane program. It's a project called Invictus, which is led by a consultancy based in the UK, Fraser Nash. And Reaction Engines was a part of the Invictus consortium until Reaction Engines went into administration. And Invictus could be the start of a point where we could see a European spaceplane flying in the 2030s.
That's very interesting. In terms of reaction engines, that technology, they seem to be sort of proving bits of the technology, and then they went into administration. What happens to the Sabre engine? Is who is now able to sort of pick that project up? Because presumably a lot of that work is still valuable and continues on from, I guess, all the stuff that Alan Bond was kind of involved in originally. That all those kind of all that intellectual property, all those kind of innovations. What happens to the Sabre engine now? Is it completely abandoned, and do people start from scratch, or does that work get picked up by this Invictus consortium and another company takes the reins?
Well, it looks like there could be hopefully a happy ending, and maybe I'll have to write a revised edition of my book in the next few years, because, in terms of the intellectual property that Reaction Engines generated, some of it is owned by the European Space Agency because they funded it. And that means that any European company can have access to that technical information. And then some of it is Reaction Engines worked on a system what's called trade secret. So they didn't patent things. They just kept it, they obviously have a few locked drawers with all their blueprints in.
Yeah.
And I've heard on the grapevine just very recently, the last few weeks, that the Reaction Engine administration has reached a point where the intellectual property has now been sold. So someone has bought it. And a candidate for buying it is the Fraser Nash consultancy that's leading the Invictus program, that's receiving European Space Agency funding and UK Space Agency funding. So we could, and I know that within the Invictus program, they have an engine program. And in actual fact, there is a link between. There's even more. There are very even setting aside the question of who's bought the IP. Fraser Nash has hired former reaction engines engineers. And also Richard Varville, one of the co-founders of Reaction Engines, has been working with Fraser Nash on Invictus. So, and the engine program within Invictus is called Phoenix.
Yeah.
So
there's maybe a clue there.
There's just a clue there, yeah. And what the engine they're currently working on for the Invictus program is it's not Sabre. It's a much simpler system, but it's not hard to imagine them evolving to Sabre. Because obviously they're going to, eventually it's, if you want to start launching 15 plus tons of satellite to payload to low Earth orbit, then you're going to need something that's more like Sabre, the Sabre engine, which is this is explained in the book, but a synergistic air-breathing rocket engine it takes air in. It has what's called a heat exchanger that chills the air, because when you're at Mach 5, the air coming into the engine is so hot because of the friction with the airframe that the air would melt a normal rocket engine or any sort of engine or any sort of material. So you have a heat exchanger at the front of the engine that can chill that air right down. And then what you do is that air then goes into that chilled air goes into the rocket chamber, and the oxygen in it is burnt with onboard, is combusted with onboard hydrogen. And then Skylon and Hotel, they both had this. You have liquid oxygen on board, and then once you get above the atmosphere, then you switch to onboard oxygen. But for those first few crucial minutes of flight, you use atmospheric oxygen to combust with your onboard hydrogen for thrust. And I think it's up to the European governments, but at the moment, Invictus is the most clear candidate to lead to what might be a son of Skylon in the 2030s.
Right, yeah.
Or grandson of Hotel.
The grandson of Hotel, exactly, yeah. Well, yeah, that'll be something to look forward to. Well, I'll do a little bit of digging for the Invictus thing, and maybe I'll see if I can get someone from Invictus to come down and chat with the Interplanetary podcast. It'd be exciting.
Fraser Nash Consultancy are the people you want to speak to, yeah.
Well, right, to wrap this up, if you got Alan Bond and Bob Parkinson to talk about where they thought we were at right now in Europe or in Britain, how do you think they would think we were doing?
Not very well.
Not very well. Yeah, no, that's I don't think they would either.
Missed opportunities.
There are some missed opportunities, aren't there? I mean, who knows? You never know what technologies are a blind alley and which ones aren't, but it does seem like we never quite gave this one the proper chance, right? I think that's
they knew it worked. That's why they classified it top secret. They knew it would work. All the technical evaluations have shown that reaction engine Skylon works.
Yeah. Is there any other nation that's sort of pursuing this as in the same way that the Brits have? Like the Chinese got like a sort of similar Skylon-esque program? There's
personnel at Reaction Engines, or former personnel from Reaction Engines, who think that who had noticed over the years the Chinese taking a particular interest in Skylon presentations being given at technical conferences around the world, but maybe the Chinese do have a ultimate Shenzhou space plane on the drawing board somewhere. But no, really, Europe should just go for it, and the son of Skylon space plane could be launching SpaceX data centers in 10 years' time.
Yeah, but I mean, it'd be what's extraordinary, I suppose, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be in competition, does it? Because it would offer such a completely different part of the market that I guess that it wouldn't necessarily be in direct competition with what SpaceX or Blue Origin were doing, but it would be much more of a, this is yet another sort of way of doing business.
With a fleet of Skylons, you could, with aircraft like operation, operating from spaceports that have runways and not expensive launch towers, you could provide a service that is as frequent as an airline, and they literally just go up, glide back, and have the sort of turnaround time that Elon Musk is making claims for his Starship. So it just requires the political will. It does need government funding. It's got to have government funding. But if Andy Burnham should declare it now in his leadership challenge, he will rejuvenate the north of England with the Skylon spaceplane project.
Yeah, he would definitely get the vote from a lot of. I wonder if they could put aside any other differences they had, and he would get my vote instantly. But if he did that. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see if he's. I guess if there's loads of jobs in Manchester, he'd jump at it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, all the airport. I mean, Glasgow, and there's some airport. I mean, obviously Glasgow's obviously in Scotland, but there's still some very long runways up in the north of England, thanks to the Cold War, and you've got British Aerospace in Warton and a whole host of other sort of legacy companies up there. You've got Rolls-Royce in Derby. Well, it's all there. It just needs to be put into action.
Yeah, that would be very exciting. Be very exciting indeed if they were able to persuade that this is the big push now. We've messed around for 50 years. Let's go for the big push.
Yeah, Britain needs a positive vision.
I think I remember having this discussion with Alan Bond himself about, with things like infrastructure builds like HS2 and things like that. It's just do it. Just do it. It's like, doesn't matter how much it costs. You won't regret it because that money, it's really not that much money. It's just, it sounds like a lot, but look at how much money just one individual has.
We need to build a road to space.
We need
Britain
to build
its own road to space.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The spending on the American railroads, in retrospect, look like pretty good value for money, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly, and realised an enormous single market. There's a direct link between the golden spike and Elon Musk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm gonna leave it there because we've run over the hour mark. It's really good to speak to you on a subject that obviously I've covered quite a few times on the podcast. It's nice to know that there's yet probably another chapter coming up. That'd be fun to keep an eye on.
The story never ends.
Never-ending story.
The human adventure is only just beginning.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on. And the book's out now, isn't it? That's right.
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon in Kindle, hardback, and paperback formats. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Hotel and Skylon, the story of Britain's
the story of Britain's space planes.
Yep. Excellent. Right. Well, I've got my PDF copy, but I am definitely going to go out and buy an actual copy.
Get a nice, that's the one.
Yeah, a nice hard copy. I'm going to see yes, brilliant. Well, thanks very much.
You're listening to the Interplanetary Podcast, putting the ace back into space.
So there you go. That was Rob Coppinger. His book is available from Amazon. I'm looking at it right now. There is a Kindle and hardcover and paperback version. So yeah, definitely worth picking up.
Amazing.
A copy of that.
And it was quite optimistic in the end.
Sort of optimistic, yeah. I mean, there's a kind of there is that horrible feeling, isn't there, that if only we'd had a bit more vision, a little bit more, just like the days of James Smithson's England,
nice.
Which would have been,
segue
back, where obviously the Victorians in particular had these grand visions and were able to do ludicrous things. If only we could get back to that kind of like grand vision, and if we were the Victorians, we'd have a space plane. Do you know what I mean? We would have a space plane if we had the Victorian mentality. Yeah, if we had the Isambard Kingdom Brunels. If Alan Bond was Isambard Kingdom Brunel's mate, we'd have a space plane, right? It may not be any good, but we'd have one, right?
Nice.
We would have one. So there was a bit of optimism that at least all that hard work with the Sabre engines and everything might go somewhere. Anyway, before we thank the Patreons, Give me a bit of this freeze-dried ice
Oh yeah,
cream.
so this is from the Summer in Space survival kit free gift thing. This is the astronaut mint chocolate chip ice cream sandwich, freeze-dried, ready to eat. There you go. It kind of looks like a Bourbon biscuit with.
No, it looks like a terrible Aero.
Oh my gosh.
No, this is nicer than the...
That's really nice.
That's actually pretty decent. I'm into this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping you can buy this in the Science Museum shop as well. Anyway, just
That is
time
really nice.
to thank the patrons: Marissa Davis, Jean Watchtannick, Tyrrell McAllister, Joseph Biennett, Ben Guthrie, Mark Huber, Mark Schwern, Steve Croucher, Adam French, and the mighty Jim King.
Thank you, patrons,
Thanks,
for supporting the Interplanetary podcast.
Without
How many episodes now?
episode 330.
330. Oh my goodness, are you going to do something for 333?
Well, I think 333 might be the last episode of the year, mightn't it? Or it'll be thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
No, not quite. No, it won't be. But anyway, yes, it will be coming. Maybe I'll do something cool for 333.
Yeah. So any ideas?
Third of 1,000.
Maybe write in any ideas for 333.
Yeah, any ideas for a 333? There we go.
I like that.
Yeah, but 300. This will be 330th episode. Mm-hmm. There we go.
I think you should do an event for your 350th. You should have for your 300, I think.
Well, yes, we should have done for 300, but
350, do an event.
So if you want to join Patreon, nice and easy, patreon.com/interplanetary. You can join for free, or you can chip in and keep the lights on. Because honestly, the lights would be off.
And there are some perks, aren't there? Different.
Yeah,
tiers
there's
and
little
things.
bits and perks, but I have to say it's mainly the feeling of thank you very much. You do occasionally get an interplanetary mug.
And there are different perks and different tiers, is that right?
There's the free membership. You got your Prospero, which of course was the only satellite launched by the UK ever.
Oh.
It's the lowest one. But you just get the feeling that you're a legend with that one.
Yes.
Black Arrow, of course, that is the next level up. That Black Arrow is the launch vehicle that launched that particular thing mentioned just then. You get to submit some questions, if you like, and of the guests or just questions in general. Skylon, you get your name mentioned. You get a Drake equation mug.
Nice.
Quite nice.
It's a very cool mug.
Yeah. And then it gets bigger and bigger. Some people have been aces. They putting the ace back into space.
Love that.
And they of course, exceptional legends. And then, of course,
that has everything.
everything.
Ava mentioned.
Yeah,
and
except
then also,
you get your name at the beginning of the show.
Nice.
Yes. I don't have any aces at the moment, but if you feel like you want to be an ace, then join up. I reckon if I get a few aces, I'm going to go back to being weekly.
Amazing. Oh, that'd be incredible.
And then Daedalus, of course, is like your mega one. Of course, Daedalus being the interplanetary craft.
What do you get? What do you get? All of that stuff aforementioned and...
Well, some of the Daedalus, it's like you get your rocket equation T-shirt.
Oh, that's a very cool
The
T-shirt.
classic. You obviously get to know that you're a legend. And actually, I have done it where some of the patrons have come on and actually been co-hosts.
Oh, I think that's ace.
Yeah.
I think you should introduce that as part of the tier.
Co-hosting.
Co-hosting.
So yes, thank you very much. And that's that. I'm going to wrap it up and eat the rest of my freeze-dried ice cream.
You can't, it's all gone.
Is it all gone?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'll have the rest of my freeze-dried mini
You
marshmallow.
can have them. I don't want them.
Oh, that's it.
Bye-bye, Spunker.